Hi everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Straight Talk with Bren O'Brien and Tim Rowe from The Straight, brought to you by our sponsors, Inglis and Darley. Today, Peter McGauran steps down the ATC, the value of a $10 million Melbourne Cup, and radio waves in Victoria. Inbreeding and bloodstock, the dispute between Racing Australia and Thoroughbred Breeders Australia over foal returns sharpens, the strength of the High Chaparral sire line, and an extended interview with bloodstock agent Stuart Boman. And in wagering, the global challenge to racing's funding model, data breaches, and a tough time for bowlers. Tim, great hugging here as always. A big 24-hour for news. It was sort of cruising along relatively quiet this week until about 6 o'clock last night when we learned that Peter McGauran was departing from the ATC. Look, not a surprising outcome, I don't think, that given what happened with the Rosehill decision and everything else, but it is a monumental time for the ATC as they sort of seek to reshape their strategy after a bit of a palaver around the Rosehill stuff.
First of all, it was a masterclass from, there's few examples this week from racing PR hacks. Great, bury it just before the 6 o'clock news on Origin night. Absolutely well played to them. Going to bury bad news when something else as big is brewing or happen. And been a few examples of that this week. And yeah, it's probably a surprise that maybe it took this long for Peter to stand down, but whether Save Rosehill had the numbers or not, that's who knows. But I think for the betterment of the ATC and moving forward, they need a new leader. And what that means for the executives there, Steve McMahon and McGauran and others, who knows if the new leader comes in and wants to sweep out the place and start again, I'm not sure. But I think for the betterment of racing, Peter had to go.
Yeah, and I think Peter did lead that, for right or for wrong, led the Rosehill charge. The execution of it was, to be perfectly polite, sloppy. They didn't execute it well from the very start, and it weighed heavily on his leadership moving forward. Now, the Save Rosehill group said that they had a petition ready to go to remove McGauran. The ATC denied that to me yesterday. They said they didn't have the numbers. We hadn't seen the numbers. It doesn't matter now. I think that the challenge is still very divisive and it remains divisive. I guess that's the point. I mean, I think that the hope that everyone will come together after the Rosehill decision and go, oh, well, we said no, we move on now. That may be the case for some of those who backed either side in the training ranks and places like that. But for people who've been at the heart of this fight, I think it goes on, and I think it rolls on for a while yet. And I think that, I think that the hope that someone may come in and make peace and sort out where the ATC needs to go moving forward might be a bit ambitious and unrealistic. But we'll see how it plays out. Racing politics is forever surprising. Perhaps Peter McGauran's departure one of the least surprising things, as you said, albeit well timed on a night where eyes were tuned elsewhere, and that sort of occurs in that regard. Tim, we'll move on quickly now to a prize money announcement for Racing Victoria. We're waiting for this one for a while. We'll start with a headline number first of all. A $10 million Melbourne Cup. Is it a good thing?
Well, they've taken money from other major races to pay for this, so it is still Australia's biggest race by, sixfold in betting turnover, and I would argue from engagement even more than that, because the $1.50 each way punters bet once a year on the Melbourne Cup. It is still vital to engagement, and I'll use my own kids as an example. It's the Melbourne Cup. My son the other day asked about Max Dynamite, what's happened to him? How many years ago did he run a place in the Melbourne Cup? Because he had $1 each way. Sorry, I did. Yes, but you know what I mean. So it still has that engagement. I think it needs a headline number, and 10 million. I can see the arguments for it. Yes, there's a cash, pressure on budgets and things like that, but I think it's okay. I think you can argue strongly that they've made the right decision there. Yes, maybe that 2 million could be spent elsewhere, but as we'll discuss, that they have topped up or the bottom of the industry with maidens and things. So yeah, look, I'm in favour. I can see why they've made that decision.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, I guess. In 1985, the Melbourne Cup went to $1 million. It was national news, first $1 million race. Now, obviously, this is not the first $10 million race in Australia because the Everest and the Golden Eagle got there before it. So it's a little bit of a different story. But yeah, there's an argument. What does a $10 million Melbourne Cup achieve that an $8 million Melbourne Cup doesn't? We'll get onto that in well, yeah, we'll get into that in a minute. I guess, yeah, I do agree with you that there's no financial reason why the Melbourne Cup can't be worth $10 million. It contributes far more than that to the racing industry. The question is whether it should be worth that, given the challenges elsewhere in the industry and the challenges faced by both Racing Victoria and the VRC in recent times. But now, part of that is this prize money down to 24th. Now, pretty much horses now get a participation levy of $100,000. So if they participate in the race, they will horses 12 down to 24th will now get $100,000. Now you work that out roughly. That's $1.2 million being paid to horses that are in the second half of a field. Now, look, I can see why it's happening, and I think it is a good incentive for those who want to participate in the race, and the VRC has sort of pitched it as a reward for those who qualify for the race. We get stuck into the win you're in debate in a minute. It's not something I'm quite passionate about, but um, is it the right move, Tim? I mean, this one's an interesting one for me.
Well, I haven't checked the conditions completely, but I think they're effectively just giving back their entry fees. I think it is, if you pay up right to the end, it is quite costly to have a runner in the Melbourne Cup. I think it was around 90,000. So effectively just giving their money back, particularly by the time the trainer and the jockey cop their 10 and 5%, they won't be giving that up. So look, again, I can see, reasons for it. It's okay. You know, the argument that, the Melbourne Cup's paying for the international horses or international owners. This way everyone gets a little piece of it and, again, wants to participate in the Melbourne Cup. I think that it would be a disaster if people go, you know what, it's not worth it. I'd rather not run my horse, and all of a sudden we have 20 horse fields, 18 horse fields, and that would actually harm turnover. And I think that's part of the argument why they'd never have emergencies in the Melbourne Cup, because they don't want people betting on emergencies and not having it getting run for their money. They can argue about it's the technology. I think it's actually that not wanting emergencies for that reason for betting, and people not understanding that, the once a year punters understanding emergencies and how that works. So, but again, I think it's okay.
Yeah. The only thing I'll say about Tim, and this is my only little thing about it, and I'm going to play devil's advocate on this one, right? The Melbourne Cup's focus has been sharp their welfare over the last 5 or 6 years, and they've achieved an excellent turnaround in the way things are going. The vets do a very stringent job of ensuring the horses that go to the Melbourne Cup are ready. So I'm not saying that's not going to happen anymore. If you had a runner who you were sitting there going, oh, maybe I'll set it for this year's Melbourne Cup. Oh, hang on, might be a little bit over the top, not quite ready to go. Maybe you could do it another year. And you go, well, if we get $100,000 for running around here anyway, what does it matter? Would you run in a Melbourne Cup? And I don't know if that for me could be a slight weakness in this argument. It's not a fatal flaw in my opinion, but it's something that needs to be considered. I no doubt the VRC did consider when they're trying to work out the desirability of paying pretty much all the way down to the last horse.
Well, because they do have, as I know, stringent veterinary protocols, and which, again, you can argue both sides, but at the moment, touch wood, it keeps going. They have reduced the fatality rate and the injuries out of the Melbourne Cup. So I'm sure those horses will be stringently have to clear veterinary checks and so forth. It is a professional industry. You would hope trainers will see their role in that, not running horses who aren't ready or are increased risk of breaking down in a Melbourne Cup, because, if it is their horse by accident, and no, I'm not saying anyone would do it deliberately, but, the spotlight will go on them. So I think from a trainer's perspective, regardless of copping their 10% of the prize money, the risk is too great for their brand, I would say. I would argue that, if something went wrong, if they knowingly knew there was something wrong with their horse.
The addition of the Melbourne Cup and the Moonee Valley Cup, the Geelong Cup and the Moonee Valley Cup into winning the ring races for the Melbourne Cup. Look, to a certain extent, it makes sense, but I'm absolutely dead against winning the ring races for Melbourne Cup. I think it diminishes the impact of the handicap and the impact of the handicap and the charm of the Melbourne Cup over the years. I'm not as worried about races like the Moonee Valley and Geelong Cup, which are so close to the Melbourne Cup, providing that weighting, because at least you're getting horses in form. I'm less inclined for these races that are given when you're in statuses during the autumn, because you often have a horse going to that race who's who wins those races, and they're pretty much just set for a Melbourne Cup for one run effectively, and they sort of pop their way through the spring, and sometimes they're out of form, and you don't want out of form horses in a Melbourne Cup. So, I but the charm of the Melbourne Cup is all about the handicap and the ability for the handicapper to assess a race on even terms based upon the horse's ability. I'm not convinced that winning to win races contribute to that. But yeah, I might be at my own here. Maybe I'm feeling like an old timer, an old man shaking my hand at the cloud. But it just doesn't feel right for me. And I feel like also a lot of these horses would make the race regardless. So we're just effectively creating false headlines about something that doesn't matter. That doesn't always happen. Moonee Valley Cup winners in particular haven't always made Melbourne Cups. But yeah, for me, it's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine around about these winning in the races.
You know, to be fair, actually, I probably agree with you on that point with to do with winning your in races and handicapping properly. I'm not a handicapper, but big spread in the weights, and giving those ones on light weights a chance, and 6 and 7 and 8 kilos from the top, I think it's good for betting, and I think it'd be good for the race.
Other prize money moves from Race of Victoria, a significant boost for maiden racing, which is a major change in the sort of structural the way maiden races are created. Cox Plate also up for this year, which is significant. It's the last Cox Plate at the current way up the Moonee Valley. Changes in the rating races will be interesting as well. Look, the maiden prize money boost is probably the main one, Tim, and probably I think it's a $5,000 boost per race effectively. So many maiden races run every year. There's discussion around about maidens being one of the hardest races to win. I believe you've got a bit of a different opinion about that.
Actually, it's the easiest race to win. It's just some majority of horses aren't good enough to win a maiden, but it is the easiest race to win by it's obvious, isn't it? So I'm not against putting up the prize money for maidens. By the way, I'm for that. I did notice that was an extensive release, media release from being right at the bottom to afford all these prize money changes, or keeping it, 316 million or whatever it is. That there's 18 fewer meetings next season. So that was a point buried at the bottom, and if I was in that position, I'd probably write it at the bottom too. But that's
Well, they did announce that last. They did announce that last month, to be fair. So that had been already out there that they had to then announce the fixtures before they announced the prize money. They usually announce both at the same time. So yeah, it is significant the fact that some of these prize money cuts is coming from changes in levies around welfare and also work cover, but also from the back there staging field meetings.
It,
Just a final one there on the Race to Victoria news this week that RSN will be sold to SEN for $3.25 million. We reported this story back in March. I think that it's likely to go ahead, and finally the deal's been done with the execution of the contract to happen from September the 1st. Look, there's reports that SEN offered a lot more money 5 years ago for RSN, and ended up being sold back to the Victorian racing industry. Look, with all due respect to radio, it is a diminishing medium in terms of its commercial value. And I think, to be honest, like from my perspective, they probably haven't done too badly racing Victoria to get some business done here. And what is a service that people do require still, but it's probably not as lucrative as it once was, Tim.
what's interesting is that Craig Hutchison SEN saw an opening, because effectively Tabcorp through Sky Racing in Queensland and New South Wales had a monopoly with their Tabcorp and Sky Sports Radio, and in Victoria they had an exclusive, or RSN had exclusivity. I think it was worth $3 million with advertising deal with Tabcorp, so it shut out all the other corporates, and SEN took that, and now that's certainly in Victoria's no longer. It seems to be interesting. Can you justify having two different shows and things like that? Obviously, there's you have appeared on it from time to time. SEN Giddy Up with Gareth Hall and RSN with Michael Felgate. Both do a pretty good job in my view. Can you justify the expense of that? That'll be the interesting thing, and probably a condensing of the racing media, and there's not many of us around, is there? So that's probably the concern. But as long as now Hutchie owns it, or SEN, that they'll be answering to shareholders. That's their main point. So how much they invest versus return, it'll be a fascinating watch over the next 12 months to 18 months, I suspect.
Yeah, there are provisos in place that they have to operate 2 frequencies, and there has to be a certain amount of Victoria content through RSN and all that type of stuff, but we'll watch that one with interest. The following segment is brought to you by Inglis. Inglis's July early online sale kicks off on Friday and runs until July 16th. Check out the catalogue at englishdigital.com.au. Meanwhile, New Zealand's champion 2-year-old of the last season, the Cracker Minions and Sistema Stakes winner Velocious, will be up for sale by the English Digital July late online sale. English Digital July late online sale will run from July 25 to July 30. Breeding and bloodstock news now, Tim, and this week we've seen the war of words escalate between Racing Australia and Thoroughbred Breeders Australia over the foal registration issue. This might look like paperwork, Tim, but there's a bit more involved here, isn't there?
It's just been back and forth, and look, hopefully they reach a resolution. The breeders have to register their foals, and no one's disputing that. They should be doing that within the 30 days, to be honest. Sometimes there is extenuating circumstances why it mightn't be done. I think the bad blood actually extends from other issues with Racing Australia and how that's managed and the pattern and all. That's where I think this is my opinion, no, not from anyone else, where a lot of the angst is coming from, and where the pushback, in Racing Australia's lack of consultation, or, very adversarial, I guess. Paul Erickson, and obviously there's the board, Racing New South Wales and Victoria having veto and all those sort of things. Hopefully they reach a resolution. Most breeders do the right thing. I think it was about 16%, wasn't it? 1 in 6 last year that didn't meet the deadline. You don't spend all that money to register a foal or to breed a foal and then not register it for $140, or, even I think it's $325 now for the late entry fee. So you don't want foals banned from racing. That is a welfare issue. I would suspect hopefully it doesn't reach that point. They need to come to the table, and even if it's privately, Racing Australia saying, yeah, look, people have to pay $500 if they want to come to an appeal, but we were not going to hold them back if there's, from registering that foal. It's just a bit of an extra penalty. Hopefully it gets to that point. Time will tell whether it does, because of that bad blood between the two organisations, I think.
Yeah. The two national organisations, you want them to be on the same page, and that's often not the case within Australia. I just want to point out this week's Run the Numbers, Tim, brought to you, like this podcast, by our good sponsors, Inglis. It was focused on the High Chaparral line of stallions. Interesting piece. I won't say interesting, I wrote it, but it is interesting to look at the impact of High Chaparral. Given, he wasn't probably seen to be a premium stallion that could stand in Australia to start with. Cornwall brought him out and brought him to Windsor Park in New Zealand. His impact has been remarkable. You look at the fact his 12 descendants of High Chaparral, sideline descendants, have produced stakes winners in Australia this season. That's second behind only Danehill in terms of sire lines. You've had great seasons from second season sires, Super Seth and Castelvecchio. Peltzer had his first stakes winner on the weekend. It's an interesting line, that line, and it's one that's, probably flies against the, early precocious Australian sort of colonial speed mode that we've had. But it's highly successful, isn't it, Tim? It's really driving some terrific results for stud masters and for those who take a chance on those progeny on the track.
Well, and what's interesting about that High Chaparral line is the majority of the best horses were from that. I think it was 4 crops from Windsor Park. So you'd think in first crop, Shootout, obviously he was a gelding. There's Monaco Consul, and then I think it was second or third crop was Dundeal, who's, obviously Castelvecchio and Super Seth, and so you think was Peltzer. So it's just interesting that maybe it's a mix of mares. Ace High did come from the Cornwall crop, and he's doing good things from New Zealand and Rich Hill there. Thanks to John Thompson, read that article and gave me a call the other day. So he's, share that to you, John. It is just an interesting line. I guess it's that outcross Sadler's Wells line, different style of horses to the Danehill, Strong, Redute's Choice, really powerful sort of horses as a rule, and I wouldn't say more athletic, but just a different style of horses, those High Chap line stallions.
Yeah, you would have thought maybe out of those other spells, line horses, Galileo's might have been the one, but High Chap's having such a massive impact within Australia. Tim, you had a chat with Stuart Boman last night, it was his time. Big week for Stu. He's been appointed the European rec for the Hong Kong Jockey Club. But yeah, I mean, obviously we'll throw to the conversation in a minute. But what were the sort of highlights for you?
Well, just on the Jockey Club, great achievement for Stu. He's an expat, lives over in the UK, Newmarket, married an English woman, Alice, and got a few beautiful kids over there, and he's doing great things. He had, as he discusses with me, Docklands won at Royal Ascot just recently. Yeah, he's been appointed to the Jockey Club. As he points out, it is a collaborative thing when you work for the Jockey Club, so he didn't go in depth because, he'll be answering to Danny Ralston, who a lot of people will know from NZB, and been up there for a couple of years in Hong Kong and starting to, I guess it's the first major change from the Hong Kong International Sale early this year in March. Wasn't as successful as they'd hoped. I think there's 11 horses. There was a proportion of horses pulled out of the sale that were already catalogued. Then there was some, understandably, that didn't get there. These are 3-year-olds, so there's a lot of time from buying them as yearlings to when they get to a sale at that stage. So they're sort of reshaping things or looking at things, how to do things better. And they've brought on Stuart Boman, who's got a good handle on both hemispheres. So it'll be interesting to see how he goes working with Danny and the Hong Kong vets and everything, and managing those horses. Thrilled this week, we've got Stuart Boman, Blandford bloodstock agent in the UK, an expat Aussie, Darley Flying Star alumni, and doing great things at the moment and having a big run. Stu, thanks for joining Straight Talk podcast.
Thanks for having me, Tim. Been enjoying listening to the podcast and reading the daily. You're doing some great work, so thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no worries. I've known you for a while. You must be a decent judge, I'd hope. You gave me a start, so I appreciate that many years ago. But you were a lawyer, and the racing and the bloodstock side of the industry has always fascinated you.
Yeah, look, I suppose it was the other way around. When I was studying law, everyone thought I was going to leave and be a racehorse trainer. So I got qualified in the end, but then was lucky enough to get on the first flying start. It just came along at the right time, and haven't really looked back since. Made a career out of bloodstock and the media and related as well at times, obviously with ANZ when we work closely together, Tim. So yeah, it's been a great journey, and it's good fun. We're lucky to be working in a business we both find our passions. It's not really a job, is it? So.
Yeah, I agree with you there wholeheartedly, Stu. I always argue that anyone that survives in racing, any longevity, it's a testament to their work ethic and ability, I think, because it's an easy game to come into and looks easy from the outside, but you've worked very hard over the years and had a lot of success with some good horses, and we'll touch on them. But, obviously, most recently, Docklands with OTI Racing and winning at Royal Ascot. That's a big thrill for everyone concerned, including yourself.
Yeah, of course. It was an incredible result for Terry and Gus and Shane. I've worked very closely with those guys for a long period of time and count them as friends as much as anything. And Terry's been a good mentor, and the thing with that horse is that he was a horse that was bought cheaply, and often with those horses with syndicators, it's not always your best owners that are, or your longest standing owners that are in them, but they've got a number of the ownership group. They're very good owners and long standing guys that are in it, and it's been a thrill. It's been a ride. The horse to win at Ascot once and then finish second the next year and then come back and win the Group 1 were just, I don't know, you wouldn't have dreamt it. So it's more about those guys and being a part of it, and it's probably more special because you're doing it with people that you've got a very good rapport with and a long-term relationship, which is sort of my aim, really, is to form those relationships and develop them and gain people's trust and hopefully get a good result for them.
As you said, you didn't pay a lot of money for that horse. I think it was Tats Island in 2021, 16,000 guineas, which, what was it about that horse at the time that sort of thought he had something about him, Stu?
Yeah, look, there was a connection in the pedigree. Harbour Views is a horse that Terry raced, and he was looking very promising at the time. Unfortunately, didn't quite reach the heights that he probably should have in Australia. And so I go through every catalogue. bit of a sales junkie. But that sale in particular was over COVID and was actually held in Newmarket. So I wouldn't have normally attended that yearling sale, but like everyone during COVID, needs must, and there's a sale in Newmarket, I'll go. So went along and look, there was a connection there. He got listed because of that. He was by a first season sire. I had actually looked at the stallion off the track to look to potentially buy him. Masset is the horse, and just like the way the horse moved, he's big, he's backwards, loved his action. Probably wasn't in the right sale because he's a bit of a bigger type. Slightly earlier sale, that one. And we had a little bit. We went through the process, and it fell our way. So, but I must have been singing pretty well that day because I managed to also buy a Group 3 winner for $9,000. So I don't know what the hell was going on that day, but something good happened. Had some good vibes going that day.
Fantastic. And you working, I don't know how, hats off to the bloodstock agents that work both hemispheres like you do, and you've had some success with Australian-based or Australasian stables, obviously Annabelle Neesham and now Archibald with Zaki, and you've got a good association with Albert Bosma and Go Racing as well.
Yeah, look, some real core, clients in my career, which have been great and very loyal to Annabelle and Rob and their team. That's been a great ride and a great journey. It started in the most extraordinary fashion. It's great to see the success they've had and the stable they've built and the business they've got. So, to be a small part of it's been a great journey, and in particular with that horse, with Zaki himself, and just seeing how close Annabelle still is with him, to this day. So he's just one of those horses. So that was great, obviously. And then Albert, and Pat and Matt, they're part of the family. I work so closely with them. They came to me sort of 3 or 4 years ago, looking to expand in Europe, and it's been a great journey. So we've been.
You were saying, Stu, that good relation with Albert Bosma and so forth, and really had good success for them.
Yeah, so Albert and came to me, Go Racing, 3 or 4 years ago to expand into Europe, and it's been a bit of a dream run with them as well. So raced a number of horses with Joseph O'Brien. I've also got involved with the with some pinhogging, some yearlings to sell as breeze up horses, which has also been quite successful. So they're really part of the family, and they really do a great job, and they enjoy themselves and have a great client base and ownership group with them that you get to know and enjoy working with. They're just a great bunch of guys.
How do you go about keeping across both hemispheres, and particularly, I guess from my point of view, is interesting looking for the different styles of horses that suit different jurisdictions. An Australian sprinter isn't going to necessarily suit the UK or vice versa. Particularly, you're looking at different styles of horses all the time.
Yeah, look, you've got to switch your view. And I think you've got to really also understand, or try to understand, what works in different regions, and just understand the sort of nuances between racing patterns and styles and training methods. Not every horse is going to fit, and that acclimatization process can be longer for some horses, and maybe never acclimatize, which is just the nature of the beast. It's horses we're dealing with here, and it's very, very different. The way they're trained here, and the slower work and the conditioning work that they do versus the shorter, sharp work, often on tighter tracks and artificial or dirt surfaces. It's and then they go. You send a horse down there that's been running over 1.5 miles, and all they've been done to throughout their whole career has been taught to relax and to settle and to stay and to see races out, and then all of a sudden we're putting them around a 800-meter barrier trial at Warwick Farm. It's a bit of a shock to the system. So, look, ultimately, to keep across it all, just attend a lot of sales in a lot of parts of the world, and watch a lot of racing, and talk to a lot of people, and gather as much knowledge and information that you can, and try and apply it to what's in front of you.
Stu, it's announced this week that you've been appointed the Northern Hemisphere representative for the Hong Kong Jockey Club. Quite an honour. As I say, it's a challenging role, but I guess your experience will hold you in good stead.
Yeah, look, exciting to get that appointment and unexpected. They came to me, Danny Ralston approached me there a couple, little while back, and it feels a very good fit. One of my first roles in racing was working for John Moore, helping him select his yearlings and be involved in their development before going to race in Hong Kong. And it feels a very familiar region and a very familiar fit. Danny's obviously Beck's NZB and very experienced and has a good team there. And look, I just going to look to play a small part in the process for them, help them with the selection of their horses and management here, and hopefully we can find the right horses that are going to be successful in Hong Kong and carve long careers there for the Jockey Club.
It is a team effort, but Hong Kong's such an interesting jurisdiction. I'm not quite sure of the percentages at the moment. It would be close to 80%, I think, would be Australasian bred horses. So, but the flag bearer Romantic Warrior was a European and Hong Kong international sale graduate. Again, is there styles of European horses that you think will suit Hong Kong that you'd be looking for?
Yeah, look, obviously there's factors to play in Hong Kong that are different to other regions. The size of the horse is of importance. Certain sire lines, you seem to have a preference. It's hard with the European horses because they're so underrepresented. And you're often comparing. You're not comparing like to like from the point of view of opportunity. A lot of these Australian and New Zealand stallions have a lot more horses representing them. So it's not necessarily a fair fight for the European horse from what I can see. I'll do my usual process and try and identify the factors which look the Jockey Club's already done. But I'll do my own work in sort of trying to model what works in the region and try and tease out the elements that we should be looking for and try and put the odds a little bit in our favor to get horses that are going to suit. But they're pretty obvious things that seem to work. Most of the races are run at sort of 7 furlongs to a mile in that sort of distance range, and obviously you need horses that've got a bit of speed and a sound and have longevity as much as anything else. So
yeah, Stu, one of the markets that Australasia is not really exposed to certainly is the Oz horses and NZ Thoroughbred marketing try to encourage them to invest down under. But in terms of export market, the Middle East is such a fascinating region. And how important is that to the Northern Hemisphere and global racing and the bloodstock industry?
Well, yeah, the Middle East is the market for us. It drives most trade in Europe. Obviously, Qatar has been such a huge region of investment of late. Dubai always and the UAE, and still continues to be so. Bahrain's growing at a rapid rate, as is Saudi. But there's the smaller countries that are also participating, which you see here. At the horse and training sales in particular, it's almost like a meeting of the UN or the Arab League. There's huge amounts of countries represented here, and primarily from the Middle East. So countries like Kuwait, Iran, Iraq. All of these countries are operating. They're all participating, and they've all got a connection to the horse, which I think is quite important. In each one of these regions, the connection with the horse is a little bit closer to other countries, and it's still a little bit closer to be a part of their culture.
I know you've got a sale to get back to, Stu. So last question, I won't drag it on too long, but the UK or English British racing, there's talk about upping the racing tax, and it seems that the industry is really united in trying to lobby against that. How do you see that at the moment? Is it too little too late?
Big question, Tim. I normally err on the side of not getting involved with politics. look, it's the underlying foundation of the funding model within British racing is, been fractured since it was first agreed. So this is just yet another knock along the way, between affordability checks, the foundation of how the levy system works here, and now this, and offshore and illegal gambling. The financial basis of racing in this country has never made any sense, and it's only getting further away from that. Thankfully, we operate in a market whereby people race horses for their enjoyment and their passion, and they have the means to do so. And there's derived value in them via either breeding or resale, and that's what makes sense in this market. But yeah, the fundamentals of get prize money and the basis of things in Britain has never made any sense, and it's only getting worse.
Stu, look forward to seeing you down Australia and New Zealand at the sales, either 2-year-old sales or early next year, hopefully. And really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Thanks to end on such a rosy note there, Tim. That was great. But yeah, I was looking forward to the role, and I'm looking forward to getting back down to a sale and Oz soon.
The following segment is brought to you by Dali, who's won 3 of Europe's biggest stallion-making races, Native Trail. He mixed in all the right circles. He won the national stakes just like Debawi and Danehill Dancer. He took out the Jewelhurst like Too Darn Hot and Pinatubo, and claimed the Irish 2000 Guineas like Kingman and Debawi. An unbeaten champion at 2, a classic winning 3-year-old, and a superb specimen from the same sire line as I'm Invincible. Native Trail returns to Dali this season. Racing class becomes breeding class, and at $27,500, including GST, is an opportunity not to be missed. Well, only Tim, on to wagering now, and relatively big weekend wagering. So we have plenty of coverage across the board. The story of up this morning is on Thursday is about this racing tax in the UK, and I guess the impact of the industry over there. There's been a very strong reaction to this. Pretty much what's happening over there, just to explain it, is the UK government are considering raising the tax on betting on racing to the same level as they do on casino games, from 15% to 21%. The impacts that the BHA, the British Horse Racing Authority, has estimated to be £66 million impact a year. They're already facing about $3 billion shortfall in wagering turnover over there. It comes at the same time as it's been pushed back from professional punters in the US over Donald Trump's famous One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which basically changes the amount of money you can write back off your losses for gambling. In America, that you pay tax on gambling, but you can write back your losses on gambling as well. And now it's a 90% write-off rather than 100% write-off. What this speaks to me is that there's plenty of parallels here, Tim. The racing tax in particular in the UK does seem to have parallels to what's happening here in Australia.
Yeah, I think so. I brought this up with Stuart Boman. The interview just played. My gripe is, if you're betting on racing, or if you're a bookmaker on racing, you're taking risk. But if you're running a poker machine facility or a casino, you're not, excluding maybe blackjack and a couple of things, you're not really taking risk. You just there's a rake there, or and you're just taking the money, and little risk involved. There should be a differentiation, certainly in taxes, to accommodate that, because wagering is different from gaming.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important distinction, isn't it? I mean, I think racing's challenge is to be seen as different from those games in time, the casino games and slots and pokies and all that type of stuff. And it's part of the discussion that's happening in Australia at the moment. What I will sort of mention in sort of conclusion for that, Tim, and people can have a read of the article and sort of work out what they want to take out of it. But what is interesting in both the UK and the US is that they have members in their federal parliaments, so their national parliaments, be that in Congress in the US or be that in UK Parliament, fighting against these changes and willing to make difference. We're not seeing that in Australia, because gambling legislation is not really driven. It's driven state by state as opposed to nationally. Obviously, there's the advertising stuff we've spoken about a fair bit, but it is interesting to see that Australia doesn't have that national approach. And as we've spoken before about some of the challenges with the Racing Australia model and with the state by state model in Australia, it doesn't really facilitate great cooperation between states to get things done. So there might be a few little messages out of there if they do get these changes in the UK changed, like avoided to the racing tax, and it doesn't go up. They're currently going through a consultation period. There might be a bit of a word about the importance of federal lobbying. A couple other stories in the wagering space. Data breach with Flutto's impacted Betfair customers in Australia. With account detailed, etc. leaked. This is happening across the board in corporate reality, like it's happened. Qantas have had it in the last week. There's been others that have happened. Optus, others that have had issues with data breaches across time. The wagering industry needs to be really cognizant of this. And finally, a story which has resonated quite well about a punter who was denied a $15,000 payout on the basis that he said he was betting through a mate's phone because his own phone went flat. Neds, who conducted the account, said that basically they thought that he was betting through a phone of someone who'd already been banned from operating on certain same race multi-products. It does raise up some interesting issues around about accountability of punters and accountability of those who offer the odds and bookies too.
Thought, these stories do well. Probably wasn't the smartest play using someone else's phone, whether it was flat or what. I can see, both sides of this argument. If you take the bet, you should pay out. I guess that's more old school bookmaking. We're very corporate, UK style. But I'm not quite sure what to say there. Is just be a little bit smarter about it if you're bowling. I guess there's other ways around it.
Yeah, the question is whether he was bowling or not. When he didn't name his mate and refused to provide evidence of where the money came from, that wasn't a good sign. This issue was from 2022, to be fair. It's taken a while for the court. Thanks for joining us on Straight Talk, brought to you by our fabulous sponsors, Inglis and Daly. Don't forget, if there's a rating wherever listening to us, be it on Apple, Podbean, Spotify, watching us on YouTube, wherever else, send us an email, editor@thestraight.com.au. A couple of people sent 3 things this week, which was great to have a look at. We'll continue to have that. We might even have a pod or a question and answer pod coming forth at some stage, Tim, to answer a few questions these people. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you again next week.